4 years ago, had you told me I'd be here today, preparing for divorce, I'd have dismissed it as absurd. She was my everything, my partner, my love, my confidant. Flawed, sure, but her fiery spirit was part of her charm. After all, she was a redhead. I believed we were destined to be together, to build a life side by side. I took those solemn vows, pledging to stand by her through thick and thin, not realizing the weight they would one day carry. Who coined the phrase, "You can't fix crazy"? I've been racking my brain for days, but the source eludes me. Nonetheless, its truth resonates deeply. Across from me sat Michael Carter, my attorney. He prefers Mike in casual settings, but today, professionalism reigns. Mike is the guy you grab a beer with. Michael is the lawyer navigating the complexities of divorce proceedings. So, Michael, any insight into why I'm knee-deep in this mess? I asked, frustration lacing my words. Not a clue, Matthew. Typically, by now, the other side is eager to lay out their grievances and flex their muscles. They aim to intimidate, believing they can gain an advantage early on. But thus far, all I know is she's alleging infidelity. Absurd, Michael. I've been faithful to Sarah. Matthew, I have to ask, if there's any truth to her accusations, now's the time to come clean. I can't effectively represent you if I'm in the dark. Leaning in, I fixed him with a determined gaze. Believe me, Michael, I've never strayed. All right, that's good enough for me. Perhaps this is all a misunderstanding we can resolve. Forget it. You've seen the evidence. You know what she's done. There's no turning back now. Matthew, she was in distress. People make mistakes. With counseling, perhaps you two can salvage your relationship, Michael proposed, his tone gentle yet pragmatic. To hell with that. I've been faithful. Her reasons don't matter, I retorted vehemently. After a brief pause to collect myself, I added, here's the deal. Get me a divorce now, and maybe in a year or two, or who knows, 5, I might be feeling more forgiving. His understanding smile spoke volumes. This wasn't his first rodeo with divorce proceedings. At that moment, his secretary tapped on the door, announcing the arrival of our adversaries. They're here, she informed us before swiftly exiting back to her desk. Thank you, Patricia. Show them in, Michael instructed, his demeanor shifting to one of professional composure. We both moved to the larger table on the opposite side of his office. Michael exchanged a brief handshake with the opposing counsel at the door, while I adhered to his directive and remained silent. Sarah's lawyer extended a hand in greeting towards me, but I ignored the gesture and took my seat, wanting no part in any interaction with either my soon-to-be ex-wife or her legal representative. Clearly accustomed to such scenarios, he proceeded without further pleasantries, simply guiding his client to her chair before taking his own place at the table. They initiated the filing, making this their meeting. Sarah's lawyer opened with a seemingly unnecessary platitude. It's regrettable that we're here today, but as Michael may have informed you, Mr. Ross, it's best to proceed without disruptive outbursts, which can unnecessarily sour the proceedings. Just a minute into the meeting, I struggled to adhere to Michael's counsel. Did he truly suggest avoiding unpleasantness? I felt a surge of anger rising within me, but Michael's knowing gaze reminded me to keep my cool, so I held my tongue. This was precisely why I retained his services. I took a deep breath, attempting to muster whatever detachment I could manage. Sarah's lawyer pressed on. I trust you've had an opportunity to review the divorce petition. My client believes she's extending considerable leniency given the circumstances. Was he trying to provoke me? Testing my restraint? Michael seized the moment. Could you elaborate on these circumstances, Joseph? We've seen allegations but lack specifics. Sarah's lawyer was clearly trying to provoke a reaction. Oh, Michael, is your client's infidelity so rampant that he's struggling to recall which mistress he was caught with? His taunts tested my restraint to the limit. If he kept this up, I'd require a muzzle and a seatbelt just to remain composed in my chair. Joseph, my client adamantly denies any infidelity. If you have concrete evidence to the contrary, now's the time to present it. I countered firmly, finding solace in the unwavering belief of my attorney. I'd repeated this defense to Sarah tirelessly, though she'd scarcely given me the chance since kicking me out of our home. Fair enough, Michael, but I have a small request. My client hasn't had the emotional fortitude to view the photographs herself. I'd appreciate it if you handled them with care. Let's spare her whatever pain we can, agreed. With that plea, he slid a sealed envelope across the table. Michael opened the envelope and scrutinized the contents, a series of photographs seemingly captured with a cell phone. They depicted me sharing a meal with a woman around my age, seated closely together at a table for two. The images showed various intimate gestures, holding hands, my arm draped around her, her head nestled on my shoulder, and in a couple of shots, I was seen kissing the top of her head before resting my cheek against hers. I vividly recalled that afternoon. Lunch was left unfinished as we eventually adjourned to her hotel room for several hours. After allowing the photos to make their impact, Sarah's lawyer resumed. While there might not be snapshots of your client caught red-handed, I think it's fair to say they didn't spend their time in that hotel room playing cards. Joseph, that's putting it mildly. These photos don't prove infidelity, they merely document a lunch outing, I countered with a touch of sarcasm. As they conversed, I studied the photographs, feeling a simmering rage building within me. I was on the brink of exploding, with little care about who might bear the brunt of my fury. Eventually, I nudged Michael and whispered urgently in his ear. His reaction was swift. He jerked back, his head snapping towards me so abruptly that he narrowly avoided headbutting me. Affirming my words with a nod, I settled back into my seat. Observing Michael as he composed himself, I awaited his response. Leaning forward, he addressed Sarah directly. "Mrs. Ross, is it accurate that you haven't seen these photographs?" She simply nodded, her tears silently streaming down her cheeks, her lawyer quick to assert her silence. "Michael, I've made it clear she hasn't viewed them." Undeterred, Michael pressed on, "And may I inquire, Mrs. Ross, how did you come to possess these photographs?" Once again, her lawyer interjected. A friend witnessed her husband's indiscretions and believed it her duty to document them. There was little doubt in my mind as to the identity of the other woman. Sarah's closest friend, Vanessa, was notorious for her cynical views on men, branding them all as untrustworthy. Her own husband's infidelity 2 years prior had left a lasting stain on her perception of men. Despite 4 years of marriage and 2 more years of history together, it seems Sarah placed more faith in Vanessa's opinions than in me. Michael turned his attention to Sarah. "Mrs. Ross, are you familiar with your husband's family?" "Of course she is, Michael. What's the relevance of this?" Sarah's lawyer interjected sharply. "And have you had the opportunity to meet his parents, relatives, siblings, and cousins?" Michael pressed on. Sarah nodded silently. "Mrs. Ross, I regret having to ask you to do this, but I must request that you examine these photographs," Michael insisted firmly. Now Sarah's lawyer grew visibly agitated. "Michael, this is unnecessary. My client is already distraught over her husband's betrayal. There's no need to subject her to further pain by forcing her to confront his infidelity." "I apologize, Joseph, but I must stand firm on this. We can address it now or in court," Michael asserted, unwavering in his demand. Her lawyer simmered with barely contained frustration before finally composing himself. "I apologize, Sarah, but if they insist on being uncooperative, there's little we can do. Just take a quick glance, and then we can appease his callousness." His words dripped with disdain, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he harbored ulterior motives, perhaps seeking personal gain once this ordeal was over. Sarah was now in tears, but I found myself oddly unaffected by her distress. Michael leaned forward, placing each photograph in front of my soon-to-be ex-wife, one after another, forming a line of evidence before her. Seeking reassurance from her lawyer, Sarah eventually turned her attention to the images, her cries subsiding into bewildered silence. "I don't understand. What is this?" "These are the photographs you claim depict your husband's infidelity," Michael explained with a touch of sympathy. Shaking her head, Sarah replied, "No, I don't understand." "Can you identify the woman in these photos, Mrs. Ross?" Michael pressed gently. It's Matthew's cousin, Deborah. But why would he be having an affair with his cousin?" Her confusion overshadowed any hint of accusation. Michael turned to me, granting me the opportunity to explain. She called me at work, distraught after catching Ben cheating on her. Understandably, she was a wreck. I tried to console her at the restaurant, but she couldn't hold it together. Sensing she'd break down any moment, I decided to get our meal to go and accompanied her across the street to a hotel room, purely for privacy and support. There was no affair with my cousin. Her lawyer appeared taken aback, struggling to regain his composure. Well, I suppose this changes things, doesn't it? He turned to Sarah, his desperation thinly veiled as he sought confirmation. Are you absolutely certain this woman is your husband's cousin? It was clear he was scrambling to salvage his position and his paycheck. Sarah simply nodded, her expression still clouded with confusion. Well, it seems this has all been a regrettable misunderstanding, Joseph began, clearly eager to wrap up the meeting. Not so fast, Joseph, Michael interjected, following my lead, though I sensed a hint of reluctance from him. I nodded, signaling him to proceed. Mrs. Ross, we have some additional photographs to show you, Michael continued, placing the first image in front of her. Do you recognize the individuals in this photograph? Sarah's demeanor shifted noticeably, relief giving way to apprehension. Yes, she responded tentatively. And who are the people in the photograph? Michael prompted. That's me, and that's my friend Vanessa, Sarah answered, her voice trembling slightly. And who are the two men accompanying you? Michael pressed further. Sarah glanced down at her hands, her response hesitant. I don't remember. Mrs. Ross, are you suggesting that you don't recognize two individuals you work with every day? Michael probed, his tone firm. Sarah simply shrugged, as if by denying recognition, she could erase the truth. But denial wasn't going to make the evidence disappear. And here you are dancing with one of these men. Granted, it's just dancing, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that, although I recall being taught to leave space between partners for the Holy Spirit, Michael remarked, injecting a hint of levity into the tense atmosphere. I don't see much space here, but perhaps it's just the angle of the photograph. Sarah's nervousness was palpable now, her composure faltering under the weight of scrutiny. In this photograph, you're kissing the same man. It's not just a friendly peck, it appears rather passionate, Michael remarked, holding up another image from the stack. And here, you're still dancing, with your partner's hands squeezing your, well, let's say your bottom, shall we? Sarah's tears flowed freely now as Michael continued, undeterred by her emotional reaction. Do you recall when these pictures were taken, Mrs. Ross? He inquired, receiving no response. And here, you're seen leaving the club with your friend and Vanessa with her companion. Can you remember where you went after you left? Sarah's sobbing intensified, rendering her unable to provide a response. My investigator followed the four of you to your friend Vanessa's house. A word of advice, Mrs. Ross. When engaging in extramarital affairs, it's best to draw the curtains completely, Michael stated, laying out a series of photographs taken through Vanessa's bedroom window. This is outrageous. None of this is admissible in court, Joseph protested, finally grasping the direction of our argument. Michael remained composed. Indeed, we're not alleging adultery. We're proceeding on grounds of irreconcilable differences. We simply wanted your client to comprehend the context, he explained calmly, sliding the paperwork across the table and allowing the gravity of the situation to sink in. The truth was simple. When I was abruptly ejected from my home, I was shattered. It took weeks to regain my footing, but once I did, suspicions arose. Sarah hadn't betrayed me before, but the conniving influence of Vanessa seemed to plant seeds of revenge in her mind. I could forgive her naivety and hot temper, but her haste to seek solace in another man shook me to my core. Forgiving her now felt like a path to enduring regret, and I wasn't prepared to accept that fate. It's true that I returned home that night without mentioning Deborah to Sarah, but in my defense, I was utterly drained from the entire ordeal. Deborah was more than just a cousin. She was like a sister to me, a confidant I trusted implicitly. I intended to explain everything to Sarah the following evening, but before I had the chance, Vanessa intervened and chaos ensued. Vanessa had only shown Sarah a single photograph taken from behind, leaving me unmistakably identifiable while obscuring Deborah's presence. I arrived home to accusations hurled at me, objects flung in anger. I attempted to reason with Sarah, but the situation escalated rapidly, and before long, the police intervened, instructing me to vacate my own home. Damn cops. That's when everything spiraled out of control. That tumultuous night unfolded nearly a year ago. The divorce is now finalized, and I received the papers today. In a divorce, there are no winners. Only a heartless individual would perceive victory when their dreams lie shattered, and the future they envisioned lies in ruins. And so, here I sit. This bar was a familiar haunt during my single days, and it somehow feels fitting to return now that I'm single once more. Sipping on a cheap beer, I hear a voice behind me inquire, "Care to buy girl a drink?" I recognize the voice, but choose not to turn around. Having a rough day? I inquire, my tone laced with indifference. "The worst," she sighs. "Oh?" I prod, not masking my lack of sympathy. "I made a foolish mistake, and I lost everything that mattered to me, the only thing that truly mattered." "Sounds like a monumental blunder," I remark coldly. "You could say that. I trusted someone I shouldn't have and ignored the one person I should have listened to." I nod, still fixated on my drink. "Yep, sounds pretty foolish." I signal to the bartender. "The lady will have a white wine." Perhaps this is a beginning, or maybe it's the end. Only time will reveal the answer. I owe it to myself to find out. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.